Ben, welcome to my show. So excited to have you here. I'm glad we could finally make time to do this podcast. Can you start by giving us a bit of a background about yourself and about IT solutions?
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me, Mother. I appreciate it. So, IT Solutions, we are a pure play MSP focused on commercial and markets with a specific expertise in healthcare and legal sectors. We'd say our ultimate goal is to build a great company with great people and provide great service. So, fairly simple. From an M&A perspective, over the last 2 years, we've done 6 acquisitions. So we now sit at around 400 employees across the nation, places like Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Kansas City, St. Louis, California. So you get the idea. We actually have employees and clients in 30 plus states across the US now. Our M&A strategy, it's pretty simple. So we're really just looking for some of the best run MSPs in major metros. We then invest in them through both organic and inorganic means to be able to increase our presence within that respective region. So from that regard, we're much more quality over quantity when it comes to MSPs, because we really see any of these purchases as building a new foundation within an untapped region that we then want to grow into. So it's kind of rare for an acquiring company like us, but we don't have any type of goal in terms of number of MSPs we have to buy per year or anything like that. In our inorganic strategy really revolves around finding really good quality MSPs in major metros that are able to raise the bar for ITS as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. And you guys have clearly been active because you've done a number of deals, like you said, over the last couple of years. Where we started this podcast idea, just so that for our listeners, was, I came to you and I said, listen, I'm seeing a lot of situations where smaller MSPs, are looking to do small bolt-on kind of acquisitions to their operations. And what do you think about that, Ben? And I think, Ben, you were back thinking, listen, I actually literally wrote about this topic, very recently, and here's what I think. So this is what I'd love for us to cover on this topic. When you see a company that's not yet fully scaled up, buying or trying to do bolt-on acquisitions, what do you think are the pros and cons? What are the pitfalls that they need to watch out for?
Yeah, it's a topic that's really interesting to me, because obviously we talk to a lot of MSPs, and quite often we hear, oh, well, I'm thinking about maybe going to acquire another company first before I sell, or want to go down that path. And I start talking to them about what their current organization looks like or what their plans are to do that. And I get a little nervous, because a lot of MSP owners, they've spent their lives building what they have. And I don't think fully understand that going to buy another MSP, going forward with an M&A strategy, should be a core competency like anything else in your business. So if you don't have that competency already built, the rate of failure is so high. So I really try and make sure, once I realize people are going down that path, that they understand what's involved if they're going to go ahead and look at other MSPs as an option or an M&A strategy. And there's a few things to watch out for that we've seen. So one of the biggest ones comes down to the fact that many smaller MSPs have a much smaller average client base. And there's really nothing wrong with having a small client base if you have the model to be able to run that. Some MSPs do this exceedingly well. I will say it's very hard from what we've seen to scale that way and be a top tier MSP with very solid growth and profitability from those types of metrics. So, a few different examples that come to mind. We've looked at an MSP somewhat recently that 2 years ago, before they went down this path, pretty much hit all of our key value drivers: good growth, good average client size, good profitability. They decided to buy 2 companies over the last 2 years. And all of a sudden, their average MRR per client went from about 5K to 2K. And all of a sudden, about 40% of their clients were made up of clients that were $1K, $1,000 less of MRR. And those clients made up 4% of revenue. So now you have 40% of your clients making up 4% of revenue. And you might ask why this is a huge deal, but part of the reason, and many people in the MSP industry know this, is those clients also tend to be some of the noisiest. Mm-hmm. So many of those clients turn upside down when it comes to profitability. and distract from some of the larger clients that are truly strategic to your business. So it becomes tough to enact on your strategy sometimes when you have a lot of noisier clients or a long tail.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the fact that you're a small organization means that your resources are limited. Your time is limited. The number of hands you can put on a problem are limited. And now suddenly, if you have tons and tons of these problems coming at you every which way, you're clearly going to get distracted and just get caught in the weeds and not be able to execute in your strategy. This is a classic case where you might think that you've added some EBITDA, but you probably are going to lose that EBITDA, and you've lowered the multiple at which that EBITDA is getting value because the quality of that EBITDA is deteriorated.
That's a great point, and it's it really comes down to organizational maturity as well. And you kind of hit on it there, which is if you have 200 clients with 15 employees, how can you truly be a strategic advisor or have a solid VCIO process when you're managing that many clients? Which is really, for example, what we look for in MSPs, for really solid MSPs and true partners for their clients and their IT infrastructure.
Yeah. So we talked about the maturity of the operational practices. Yeah, I would imagine that that statement applies both to your internal operational maturity to be able to to have that in place to be able to do an acquisition, as well as the operational maturity of the company that you're looking to acquire. And talk to me a little bit about both sides of that coin.
Yeah, I mean, so we're always looking for, again, companies that can raise the bar for ITS. So that means a company that has a certain level of operational maturity. It's possible that we'll have to put some of our processes on that. We fully expect that. In fact, we plan for that. But I'll give you another example of what we see with some less mature MSPs that make for a very tough integration is around agreements. So for small clients and small MSPs, it's often okay to be all things in the agreement, kind of an all-you-can-eat type of agreement, which makes it very difficult for service delivery to be able to know where those edges of the agreement end, which then results in usually high costs, which hurt profitability. So it's processes like that that have to be thought about. And if you think about that from an integration perspective, if you're enacting an M&A strategy, that probably means that all those clients then need to be put on new agreements over time, which is a very tough thing to do for anyone that's been through that.
Yeah, and then I think piggybacking on that point, one always thinks about the possibility of client attrition when one is doing an integration, right? If you have fewer of these sort of tail clients, I think you have fewer people to kind of relationship manage around. If you have lots of them, I feel like it's hard to relationship manage around so many of them. And you probably, I don't know, I don't see that number very closely, but do you feel that the attrition rate, right, on client bases that are like lots and lots of small clients could be like really high because of that difficulty in communication across so many people?
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, look, there's good churn and there's bad churn, right? So sometimes there are clients that are super noisy, or for one reason or another, or a very small amount of revenue and using a certain amount of resources. But to do that type of thing requires a lot of work, right? You're now going in and saying, okay, well, you want to do the right thing by that client. So you have to work with that client, transition them to another MSP, sometimes find them another partner that can help service them better, that better fits into their model. So it's a difficult thing to do, which is, part of the reason that I think overall having an M&A strategy, you have to have a plan for that before you buy the company, right? And you have to have a team that can go ahead and execute on that strategy, which will take them away from the core business that is being worked on today.
Yeah. Another piece I think that I'd love to hear your comments around is like tech stack compatibility, right? So always, I think, is a big thing to consider, is the ease with which you can sort of fit their tech stack into your tech stack when you're doing this. When you're doing bolt-ons, I wonder whether that becomes just harder because there's so many different variations of that now that are now coming at you, and now you have to integrate all those things into your business or switch them out.
Yeah, it's a factor, but I wouldn't say it's the most critical one.
Okay.
Out of everything to consider. A lot of tools end up being interchangeable as long as
Okay.
your clients are getting the service that they've been accustomed to.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't want to change a tool that's then going to create a worse client experience. But
Right.
as long as it's the same or more, typically clients end up being agnostic to the tool that is being used.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's about the most technical advice you'll ever get from me. I'm definitely
Right.
not a technical expert, but but along those lines, one of the things that is often overlooked that should never be is around culture. And when you talk about client attrition, employee dissatisfaction with an integration process can correlate directly to client attrition. So this is another thing, when you look at some smaller MSPs looking for an acquisition strategy, it's important to have somebody resource that's accountable for the integration and the employee experience. Because again, if the employee experience isn't positive, then you can surely understand that the client experience also probably will not be positive.
Yeah.
Right? And they'll feel that pain, which is tough because again, if you're a small MSP, say with 15, 20 employees, to make that investment in a pure play integration lead, for example, and then take those resources towards an integration is very costly.
Yeah. So this points to the fact that there are many things about an M&A process that just have some fixed costs, sunk costs up front that you have to put up with, and that means that you must be confident about executing at scale to make that worth your while, which is difficult to call when you're doing bolt-ons.
That's right. Yep. That's exactly right. And for this reason, usually the integration process takes much longer than anticipated. So we actually have two of the companies that we have acquired that have bought companies previously more than 2 years prior to us buying them. And they will all tell you that what we thought would take 6 months took about 2 years.
Wow.
We've looked at many companies that have bought companies much more recently than that and have decided to pass almost on the pure basis that they haven't had the opportunity to integrate, which means for us, it's basically buying two separate companies.
Right. Yeah.
With double the work, usually with value expectations that are exceedingly higher than what would make sense for an MSP like ITS.
That's another great point. I was talking to one of your peers, and we were working on a deal together, and one of the first things he asked me for when we were showing him the company was, he said, show me the org chart of this company. I want to see whether the other acquisitions that they've done really stand as separate silos or whether they're actually integrated into the company. That was one of the first questions he asked. And I think it's going exactly to your point about how much work is this going to be to integrate? Are these really 3-4 separate companies, or is this actually one company?
Well, that's a great. I'll give a little company secret here, but when we do look at other MSPs that have acquired other companies and they tell us they're integrated, the first thing I do is go to the website and look to see if they're using old company names or not.
That's such a good point. It's clever.
You can usually tell that it's
100%.
There's still some work to be done.
Work to be done. That's a great point. That's great insight. So let's take one sort of step back. What are some of the things you need to have in place? And I think you've touched on some of these things before, but it doesn't help to have it all in one place right now. What are some of the key things you need to have in place as a system or as a process before you can say, okay, now I am good to go out and go try and integrate another company?
Number one by far is an organic sales engine. Right? A new logo growth engine, I think, is number one, because that's how you're going to extract the most value from an acquisition, to be able to buy a company and then continue to grow it further from there. If you're not able to grow your own company in its current state, well, buying another company is surely not going to help that, right? Yeah. Except anything, it's going to exasperate it, because now you're going to have other distractions and other problems that most likely set you back. So first and foremost, that's number one. And also, quite frankly, that's one of the number one things that drives value for an MSP. If you're trying to increase your enterprise value, being able to show demonstrated high growth rates and new logo sales is huge. So that's number one. And then some of the other things that I would just suggest, and again, this isn't to say that no one's done this well or it can't be done. It 100% can be done well. And we see MSPs acquire other MSPs and are successful in the first time, and it's just rare. But what we see when that does happen, and it happens well, is usually a level of sophistication and scale. Right, so those investments are made. There's some scale in place where that at the time when integration should start, and even prior, right? Integration should always start during the diligence process, really. But when integration starts, there's a team dedicated and focused on making sure it's successful. Usually we're big believers in one point of accountability. So who's leading the integration? That should be a fully dedicated role. I mean, that's definitely a key component from my perspective of being successful. And making sure that plan's in place, that integration plan is established and someone's held accountable to be able to go and execute it. So having that level of sophistication and maturity is important. Understanding the cultural alignment. So well in advance of closing through the diligence, even honestly before an LOI, there should be a certain level of certainty that there will be cultural alignment in place. And when I say culture, I mean, that takes probably one of the most overused words ever, but it takes different shapes and forms. And for example, one of the things that's simple to ask and look at is, well, you know, in the small MSP, an employee might be there because they love working for a 10, 15 person employee company. They joined, that's what they signed up for. For that person, even a company with 50 employees might be a big company. And on day one, they're going to say, this isn't what I signed up for. They might choose to elect out. Right. So I'll put that in the culture category, but something that should definitely be diligenced in advance, but usually isn't diligenced enough. So understanding those risks, what's the plan? How do the cultures align? And what can you assume from an employee experience is extremely important. Because again, I think we said it earlier, but if employees are not happy, that will definitely have ripple effects for clients as well. And then two more things that come to mind: setting realistic expectations. Right. So again, it comes back to that sales comment. If you weren't driving organic sales alone, you're surely not going to be able to do it with embarking on an M&A strategy. So setting expectations on timing, cost, scope creep, and cost increases is one of the most common things in M&A integration. So having the budget and the time, understanding what it's going to take. And then, my last point here would be about utilizing outside experts, especially if this is your first time or you're a smaller MSP where maybe it doesn't make sense to have it all, in-house. But, even today with our organization, we have dedicated integration people, we have dedicated roles. We still use outside counsel. We still use outside financial experts. It's really important to use the outside experts when it comes to M&A to make sure you're getting an unbiased type of view and tap into that expertise.
Can you dig a little bit more into that? This is probably more for my own selfish interest. What do you see the most are some of the more valuable things that an advisor brings to the table for you?
Yeah, well, so advisors come in different shapes and forms, right? So when we talk about legal advisors, it's really important for us to help guide us through a deal and through negotiation points, right? So most SPAs are very similar. There's not a lot of creativity in how they're established, but there's always one or two things that usually becomes a sticking point. So having advisors to be able to help guide you, especially if it's a business term, to understand what impact that might have on the business as you use the SPA, the sale purchase agreement, as a guide for that. And then financial advisors are really important as well. So we almost all the time will do a quality of earnings, a QOE report, to make sure that the financials are in fact what we believe they are going into evaluation. We pride ourselves at ITS on establishing an LOI, a letter of intent, to be almost identical, if not very closely, to what the definitive agreements look like. Right? We don't want to play any games from that regard. We want to create a certain level of deal certainty. So we do a quality of earnings very soon after an LOI is signed and ensure that we're right on target there. So, I mean, those are two advisors that we lean on very, very heavily here at ITS.
Yep, makes sense. I want to ask a question which I think is connected to this topic, but I think it's also a bigger picture question. It sort of has to do with the future of this space and where it might end up at, right? So we clearly see situations where there are sort of like, I wouldn't say hard, but fairly well established like guidelines on the minimum level of operating cash flow that you want to look at before you say, you know what, this is what is worth my sinking my teeth into spending time on to try and integrate. So maybe that number is, I don't know, let's call it $1 million of EBITDA, right? But we also know that this industry is that finding companies in that $1 to $5 million EBITDA space is actually quite tough. There are not that many out there, that fill into that bucket, which is why I think people have jobs to look for those companies, right? The vast majority of them, by far, are below that $1 million EBITDA space. Those are the sort of these bolt-on target candidates, right? If they are too small for you, and they are tough to integrate into the next level up MSP, right? What is their future?
Yeah, Mother, that's a great question. And I don't know if I know exactly what necessarily their future is, because every single one is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I'll say is we originally started with the thesis that we'll only look at MSPs with 1 million of EBITDA or higher.
Mm-hmm.
But what I could tell you, the honest truth is that's really probably come down to about $500,000 of EBITDA.
Okay.
And that's because if you think about our type of target, we're really looking for well-mature MSPs that have a certain level of sophistication where we at least can see the potential to scale that.
Yeah.
So this isn't to say that all smaller MSPs fall into this bucket of where they have very long clientels or low profitability. There's a lot of MSPs out there that are, say, less than 5 million of revenue, less than 500,000 of EBITDA, that are operationally really sophisticated, right? Operate at a $10 million revenue company.
Right.
Those are the ones that, if we're going to go sub $1 million of EBITDA, that we look for. And I can tell you they're out there because we've seen them, and we've even purchased one or two. So it's possible that, I think that the key thing for any MSP, any size, is developing that organic growth engine, investing there to be able to build enterprise value. And if you can do that, I think then there's a really bright future ahead. And also, look, if your core model is to focus on smaller MSPs, you can design the service delivery function around that. But that's going to be a different strategy, I think, than some of the more traditional MSPs that have, say, a VCIO or a fractional CIO type of role and that type of infrastructure, because from a cost perspective, it just wouldn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think you're making a good point, which is it's not so much about the dollar number of the EBITDA. It's sort of like around the cohesiveness of the business and sort of how tightly how tightly is it run so that it can be scaled up properly if and when it does need to be scaled up. And so that gives me some relief, because I think that there probably are vastly more number of MSPs who are in that smaller bucket. Although, like you said, and in many instances, they have issues around operational maturity. And the other one that I think they often have an issue around is just client concentration risk. So this is the opposite end of the problem. There are, on the one hand, you might have guys who have lots and lots of small clients, right? But then they typically will also have this one client that does like 25, 30, 40% of their revenue. And then that leads to client concentration related concerns, which I've seen.
That's a really great point as well, because what you see is sometimes MSPs go very quickly from 5 million of revenue to 10 million of revenue. And sometimes when that happens, it's because one or two clients brought them to that, right? So now they have concentration where the top client is 30% of their overall MRR. Yeah. And that's really tough, right? Because as an MSP owner or leading an MSP, you're not going to tell that client, like, no, right? Like, you can't buy any from us. Yeah. But this just reinforces the point of how important an organic growth engine is. Because if you continue to bring on new logos, as say that example, that client was growing, well, yeah, they're going to continue to be more % of your revenue, but you're going to have other clients come in that will help dilute that a little bit. Yeah. Well, again, organic growth and investing in organic growth engines can help so much.
And the fact about trying to develop an organic growth strategy, Ben, you're saying this, I hear it from others as well who are in sort of in your seats. We all understand that. I also hear the other side of the story, which is the engineer story, which said, I came in here to fix computers. I'm not that passionate about, I mean, I don't know that they say it, but I think that they're sort of admitting it, that they're not as passionate about, creating a sales and marketing effort.
Well, yeah, it's out of the comfort zone, right? And I think that's where you have to make the right, if you're a technical expert, just like, for example, and it comes back to M&A as well, right? I wouldn't suggest anyone endeavors on an M&A strategy without someone that understands how to do M&A and integrations.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try and start a new logo engine without somebody that knows how to do new logo sales, right? So investing in the right people to be able to lead those functions is really important.
Yeah, really important. And like you said, I mean, that's not often their sweet spot, so they have to sort of outsource this, and they probably don't know exactly how to go about doing it. And then also, like, sometimes it just takes persistence and patience. You have to take a strategy, you have to stick with it, you have to believe in it, you have to continuously improve it, and all that takes time and effort. And you know, if your heart's not in it, then the risk that you won't stick with it, I think, just sort of goes up. This has been really helpful, Ben. I really appreciate your taking the time to talk about this topic. I think it's very topical. A lot of people who are listening in will appreciate some of the things that you mentioned over here, and really hope to be able to do more of these on other topics as well.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise, Mother. I really appreciate the time. And thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ben.